So in this video, I'm going to talk about how to write quadratic and square root equations using technology on your calculator. So remember that given a table of values, you can use quadratic regressions on your calculator or Desmos to write the equation of a quadratic function. So on the TI-84, we're going to click Stat and choose option 1, which is Edit. Clear any values that we have in our table before entering the values from our problem. Then you're going to click Stat, arrow right to Calculate, and choose option 5, which is Quadratic Regression. The calculator will now give you the values of a, b, and c that you can use to write the quadratic equation. So let's try this example problem. So we're going to start off by clicking Stat, and then choosing Enter on 1, which is Edit. So you can see here we already have values in L1 and L2. So we need to arrow up until the title of the column is highlighted, click Clear, and then Enter. Arrow over and do the same thing for L2. Now we can enter the values from our problem into L1 and L2. So now we're going to click Stat, arrow right to Calculate, and choose option 5, which is Quadratic Regression. Keep clicking Enter until Calculate is highlighted, and then click Enter again. Now the calculator gives you the values of a, b, and c that you can use to write your quadratic equation. Notice that a is 2, b is -6, and c is 5. So that's how we get the equation y equals 2x squared minus 6x plus 5. Now you can go ahead and pause the video and try this example on your own. So using your calculator, you can find that the equation is y equals 4x squared plus 11x plus 2. So you go to Stat and then Edit. So here's the table of values I've already have entered into my calculator. So then you click Stat, arrow to Calculate, choose option 5, and then choose Quadratic Regression. Keep clicking Enter, and it will give you this equation. If you have a different answer, make sure that you click Stat and then choose Enter on Edit and double check your table of values. So now let's talk about how to write the equation of a square root function. Your calculator does not do square root regressions. If you click on Stat and then arrow to Calculate, you will notice that square roots is not on the choice of regressions that we have. So what we'll need to do is to write the equation of the inverse of the square root function, which is a quadratic function. So we can use quadratic regressions to do that. And then once we have the quadratic equation, we'll find the inverse of it to figure out the square root function. So here are the steps. So we're going to start off by creating a new table. We're going to need to switch the values of x and y because we're actually going to find the equation of the inverse. Then steps 2 through 5 are going to be the same as we did when finding quadratic regressions. And then in step 6, we're going to use algebraic methods to find the inverse of the quadratic so that we can figure out the square root equation. So let me show you what this looks like in an example. So let's find the square root function that best fits this table of data. So this table fits the square root function, right? But like I said, we're going to have to find the quadratic first before we can figure out the square root. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this table and I'm going to reverse the x and y values. So 4, 5, and 6 are going to become my x values, and 3, 4, and 7 are going to become my y values. So now I'm going to go to Stat Edit, and I am going to enter my new values into L1 and L2. Okay, so not the original table, the new table is what's going to go into L1 and L2. So now that I have this table, I'm going to click on Stat, arrow to Calculate, choose option 5, which is Quadratic Regressions, and then keep clicking Enter, and now it tells me that the quadratic equation is y equals 1x squared minus 8x plus 19. Remember that in algebra we usually don't write the coefficient of 1, so we're just going to write that as y equals x squared minus 8x plus 19. Well, I'm not done solving this problem yet, right? Because remember, I need to find the square root function. I'm not looking for the quadratic function, I need the square root. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this equation and I'm going to find its inverse. Okay, so I'm going to start off with this equation, which is y equals x squared minus 8x plus 19. So what I'm going to do now, remember when I'm finding the inverse, is I switch the x and y values. So this is where I undo that switch I did in the first place where I reversed the table. So now I have x equals y squared minus 8y plus 19. Well, remember when I'm writing an equation, I want it to be solved for y, right? I want y equals something. Well, I have y here in more than one term. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to complete the square to write it as a perfect square trinomial so that I can condense it down and I can get a situation where I have y in one term. So let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to start off by completing the square. So I have y squared minus 8y, and then I'm going to need to add something here to complete the square. Well, in an equation, I'm not just allowed to add one number. If I add something, I need to subtract the same number in order to balance out my equation. So what do I need to add here to complete the square? Well, remember that formula is going to be b divided by 2 squared. Remember that b is the coefficient of the linear term, which in this case, that's negative 8. So I have negative 8 divided by 2, and I'm going to square that. So that actually is negative 4 squared, which is positive 16. So I'm going to add 16 here. So remember, to balance it, that means right here I need to subtract 16. So now I have x equals y squared minus 8y plus 16, and then plus 19 minus 16, which is plus 3. So now what will happen is these three terms form a perfect square trinomial. So I can condense that down and write that as y minus b over 2, so that's 8 over 2, which is 4, so y minus 4 squared. Okay, and if you want to check, you can expand that out and see that it does in fact equal y squared minus 8y plus 16. So don't forget, I still have this plus 3 on the end, so I'm going to write this plus 3 right here. Well, now I still need to work on solving my equation for y, but this is better because I only have y now in one place in my equation. So I'm going to work from the outside in and work on getting y by itself. So on the outside, I have this plus 3, which I'm going to undo by subtracting 3 on both sides. So that gives me x minus 3 equals y minus 4 squared. Well, now I need to undo the squared, right? That's the next thing that I have. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So when I take the square root of both sides, I get x minus 3 under the square root, and then that equals y minus 4. So now y is almost by itself, but it's still not completely done yet, right? So we have to undo this minus 4 by adding 4 to both sides. Remember, when I add 4 on the left, that's going to stay outside the square root. Okay, so whatever's inside the square root stays inside, and then the plus 4 is going to remain on the outside. So that's the square root of x minus 3 plus 4 equals y. And now I finally have my square root function that is going to satisfy the values in this table that I was originally given. So now you can try this example on your own. You can go ahead and pause the video and try finding the square root function that best fits this table of data. So remember, the first step in doing this problem is to switch the x and y values, right? The x values become the y values become the x values. Then you're going to go to Stat Edit on your calculator and enter these values into L1 and L2. Remember, you do stat calculate and do a quadratic regression to find this quadratic function x squared plus 10x plus 23. So now you have this function, you're going to switch the x and y values. So this becomes x equals y squared plus 10y plus 23. So in this case, b is 10, so b divided by 2 is going to be 5. So we have 5 squared, which is 25 that we added here, and then we have to subtract 25 to balance it out. So now when we write this as a condensed form, we have y plus 5 squared minus 2. And then so now we need to add 2 to both sides, so which gives us x plus 2 equals y plus 5 squared. Taking the square root of both sides gives us the square root of x plus 2 equals y plus 5. And then we need to subtract 5, which gives us our final equation, which is y is the square root of x plus 2 minus 5. So remember that using a table of values, you can write the equation of a quadratic function using quadratic regressions on your calculator. You can write the equation of the square root function by using your calculator to find the inverse, which is a quadratic function, and then you can find the inverse of this function to find the square root function.